Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. I don't know whether I should say hey up, hello, good morning, good afternoon, but whatever we do, you are very, very welcome, and we are glad that you are listening. We're also glad today to be with a good friend of the podcast, and many of you who were at Uprising in 2024 will recognise the beautiful face of Mr. Ian Phillips, and you'll recognise his dulcet Welsh tones very, very soon. It is absolute pleasure to be have Ian on the podcast today. So I know we've been talking about doing this for a while, Ian. So thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit about you and your maybe a potted history, because I know you've done some cool things, right?
It's a privilege and a pleasure to do this, guys, and to see you again after just a couple of weeks. And the Uprising 2024 was an outstanding event, and you must be really proud of what you achieved there. Yes, you'd both nod in, that'll do. Potted history, I was involved in music until I was 30. And sort of played in a band and did all that sort of stuff. And then decided that education was the thing for me. And I worked at state schools for 17 years. And then when my son got into the only school where there was a murder every week in London, I decided I had to do something about it. So I went into an independent school and got him somewhere safe. And I stayed in the independent schools then for another 17 years, working at City of London School for Girls and Haberdashers in Elstree. During that, I did the ISC digital thing where Mark Steed and I were doing that, and then I was eventually the chair of that for the last part of that. And as a result, got to look at what a learning community is and how digital can empower. The problem I found was that we talked about strategy and digital strategy for forever. And when I went into the schools, I didn't find there was that same thing. So I finally retired, and now I'm working in schools and looking at the implementation of digital strategy and looking at the reality of that. And there's a couple of other things I'm doing as well. As you probably know, I've been working with an Indian company looking at an IT curriculum, and I've been working with Intel looking at implementing AI in Wales. So just a couple of things that sort of bubbling over at the moment. Good
very
enough?
Cool. Very cool. Absolutely. So the you mentioned ISE, just to kind of scale back to that, and I know we're going to get onto some other topics, but that was started quite a while ago when digital and all of those things weren't to the forefront. I think, like I say, people often say we want to do this and we talk about it, but when you actually get under the skin of these organisations, I think there's a cultural thing where ultimately they want guest speakers, potentially they want people to come in and potentially, and maybe I'm misinterpreting, but in terms of the independent state, it's a recruitment thing where they have to be looking like they are doing something different to anybody else, because recruitment and obtaining students through the door is how they balance the books and run as a business. So do you see the same cultural things in terms of those people say, yeah, we want to do this, but actually when you get in, you're doing a presentation, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work and some of the screens weren't working back in the day. So did you think that was potentially one of the challenges, changing the whole culture of organisations and structures and systems?
Culture is the thing. Culture is what is critical to making change stick. I mean, and I'm using a James Mannion phrase there because I've got a lot of respect for the work James Mannion is doing. And it's great to have good ideas and initiatives with digital. I'm not sure. I see there's a symbiosis between independent schools and state schools. And most of the independent schools I've worked with have a network of schools, including state schools, that they actually coexist with and support. And there's some really interesting work going on there. Now, part of that clearly is marketing because they're trying to recruit, but part of that is also philanthropy. And I do believe there is a charitable nature to a lot of the really good independent schools. As far as the making change stick, it's really tricky to develop the implementation plans that are really going to make that work. And one of the things I think has got in the way is the people making the decisions weren't equipped to make those decisions. So it'll be the bursar and the head and the academic deputy. If all of those are bought into the reality of what digital can do and how it can empower, Bob's your father's brother, it's going to happen. If those people don't know how to make decisions, they're going to have a different set of criteria on which to make decisions. And there are so many catastrophes in state and independent schools. But one of the things that is clear that in state schools, there has been a better process for making those digital decisions because they've had to. Because the money is tighter and perhaps there's a bit more scope in an independent school. And so they've tried, as you say, Steve, to be a bit more innovative and as a result, perhaps made mistakes because those processes weren't in place, whereas in independent schools, they'd been put in place from needs must.
Do you know, I hear that, and I think it's a really good synopsis and an insight into how decisions are made around digital a lot in organisations. I remember back in 2015 writing a piece, 2016 maybe, writing a piece around gatekeepers in education. I think you remember me having this conversation with you, Steve, right? So we had a conversation about how technology has certain gatekeepers and how do you explain to the people that you're a teacher on the chalk face who is realizing that there's a tool or there's a way of thinking or a project-based learning type scenario. How do you explain that to somebody who is going to be making the decisions around budget? And we were talking. The piece was written around how do you influence gatekeepers or how do you become a gatekeeper? But more importantly, how do we ensure that gatekeepers are not just somebody knocking on the door for the next piece of shiny new toy syndrome, the next best thing? And we've said this before, haven't we, Steve, that this whole conversation around that. And I think that really ties heavily into, obviously, at the event and prior to that, you managed to gather a wonderful, eclectic mix of people, including Nick Dennis flying in from Hong Kong and others who have travelled from all around the UK to kind of have this conversation around the war for teachers. And some of that is about that resourcing that we're kind of alluding to here. But we also had that broader conversation about we're in a world now where education has probably not had the priority for in many governments. It's not just one particular government for a while, and there's a war for teachers where we're having this thing around recruitment, retention and resourcing. Ian, yeah.
So, such a good question to talk to and to segue into what we talked about with the 3 R's. The 3 R's is such a fantastic topic at the moment for us to be exploring. The idea that recruitment, retainment, and resourcing are fundamental. They're also fundamental to the way decisions are being made in schools. And I feel really strongly that we need to be equipped, and everyone needs to be equipped to be able to make those decisions. And a lot of the times, those decisions in schools about recruitment, retainment, and resourcing are being made by the people who have those positions of authority in the schools, but perhaps may not really understand the full benefit and the long-term benefit. I did a thing in 2018. It was an Intel project called Developing Digital. We were working with research machines, and there was a survey that ISBA did through research machines, and it found out that 66% of people in schools didn't feel that they were getting the value from their investment technology. And 66% of people in schools, in authority in schools, didn't feel that their estate was safe and the young people were teaching. And I felt that was a really significant thing. So we did some work over about 3 years, and Ty Goddard was involved with it. And we ended up writing a thing called Developing Digital, which Intel sponsored, which went to and talked to what the important issues were in Developing Digital and how we needed to invest in the people. And this was a thing that came up very much last week at the Uprising event. If you don't invest in and support people who are working in the school to be able to use the facilities, use the resources, and invest in the relationships, because they're the fundamentals of it. If you don't invest in that, then you will not get your return on investment. So we tried to put it within a business context, because schools will all have to operate on a business. But we tried to make sure that in what we did, we emphasized this is a people-first business. Any strategy should be people-first, and that we need to invest in. Does that make sense? And so that then leads in to what we were talking about. And we were blessed to have Evo, and we had Kai Vasha, and we had James Cully, and we had Deb, and we had Conrad and Shona. We had such a great group of people then to give their personal stories, and everyone endorsed concept that partnerships have been fundamental to what they did, and that also that putting people first was the way, again, to get this making change.
When I first moved out of education into the industry that I'm in, supporting education, but in a different guise, I started a course that was like a short masters, part funded or majority funded by government, but I did it through Leeds Business School, and ever since then I've been going back. So a part of the Leeds Business and SMB business opportunities in the city and the region. And one of the most fascinating talks that they gave, and I've been to the repeated one, even though it was the same person presenting, was around a McKinsey report that was maybe a decade old called The War for Retention. And ultimately, I think education is in a crisis in terms of the 3 Rs. But actually, it's an industry-wide thing, because people don't want to be put into a particular job. They want to be doing this and this and this. But it was fascinating in terms of some of those statistics, and looking at it from a business point of view. They were giving advice and giving some great examples from industry of really low-cost opportunities that could be put into education. So they were talking, and I'm not saying that this is what education goes out and doing, but it was like family tickets to on national rail discount cards for families. So when you have a weekend, you and your partner or your children, if that's or as an individual, they give you and you get some real discount, so you can celebrate your opportunities outside of work. They were talking about loads of different things, and I was looking and going. So I added it all up, and it was really cheap. And people say, "Oh yeah, but you can do that in business." I was like, ultimately, we make some really some decisions in education that actually cost us more money than it would some sensible things. So I think that's a really thing to supporting, celebrating, and different initiatives that we haven't done before can help each individual teacher, each individual thing. That I think is great. And we had, and just on a completely different tangent, we had the real David Cameron on the podcast last week, and he really shared some stuff. David's been doing some great work. He was a head. He was a deputy director, a director of children's services in education in Scotland, and he was walking through and saying, why is it that we're obsessed with classrooms? And when we put new buildings, all of the classrooms have to look exactly the same, and you have to be able to get 30 or 35 seats in there, and so that somebody can teach in this way and this way. And I've been thinking about this, and I was like, I remember an initiative that I came up with where lots of different spaces, different size of spaces for different purposes in education. And I'm not saying that ultimately, if we've got a recruitment crisis or retention crisis and we don't have enough teachers for a particular organisation or multi-academy trust or a sector, by saying we need, for every 30 students, we need one member of staff or two members of staff, exactly. And if we don't have that, what we're going to do is we're going to increase the amount of hours or the amount of students that is in a class, which is probably the best solution for it. Why don't we be more creative with some of these spaces where actually what you do is you have a short burst of delivery to a large group of students or young people that is around a topic, like a teacher or a trainer that really understands that topic, brings it to life, like in a Montessori approach of the volcano. We had that kind of stuff. Here's 10 minutes. Right, go off to all these smaller rooms in 10s and 15s. We're going to have a study coach or somebody that's maybe a facilitator of learning in these different spaces. We're going to facilitate you. You've had you, and people are just going to be there to support you. Then you can come back and you're going to deliver back to us in terms of the learning that you've done. But what we do is we just put everybody into a small box with 30 people all in classrooms, as cheap as we can get it, facing the front. But actually, a solution could be a variation of our learning spaces within those environments that actually help facilitate a different structure in terms of or teaching and learning, and a different way that we can then start to facilitate learning in different ways rather than all the classrooms looking the same. You wouldn't do it in sport with sports halls. Maybe just a thought on that, because I think that's a good solution potentially to a problem.
What you're talking about is the rub between an institutional model and a learning. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about how the two things are completely oppositional in a sense. And there's a lot of work, exploring this. And I noticed Melissa McBride got an award, an Edufuturist award, deservedly, for some of the innovative work she's doing with online learning and hybrid learning. And there's a whole movement exploring this. And I think, one of the things I mentioned earlier was people first. But I think, I don't know if you can see my mouse mat here. We created this mouse mat. You've got that. So look what's at the center of that.
For those people who are just listening, we'll put a link to this in the show notes.
I will do.
For those people just listening, we'll put a link in the show notes.
And the blessed people have these because we've produced 200 of these as part of the removing digital headaches things I'm doing. We've produced 200 of these, and the blessed and the great and good have been given these because it's basically got a big heart with all the people involved in supporting students, but the students have to be at the center. So not only should our digital strategy, be people-centered, but we need to make sure that it's not the teachers at the center, although we need to empower our teachers to inspire our students. And
interestingly, the great and good, Ian. Thanks for. I presume mine's in the post, right?
Yeah. I thought you had one already. And Steve, you've got one, haven't you?
It's all good. It's all good. We're only young bucks in this, Ian. We know that. We get it.
So everyone I've worked with, but we're doing another Removing Digital Headaches roundtable in Scotland on October the 7th at ESMS, and there's another 200 being produced. So if yours hasn't got to you by then, I'll make sure. Well, I mean, the two of you might even want to come to that event because it's it's safeguarding personalising learning, which again is all I think what we should be about.
Absolutely. And do you know what's really interesting from what you've said there as well, Ian, is that the student at the centre is like everybody in education would attest to that. They would say it's always about the student. And then actually it's like that lip service. And then we go, okay, yeah, but it's about the curriculum. It's about the exams. It's about the budgets.
It's about the assessment.
All the And ultimately, when we come to this idea about the war for teachers there, the war for teachers has to have students at the centre, doesn't it? It's that conversation of the reason why we need teachers and we need to recruit more, we need to retain more, and we need to resource our teachers better is because at that whole heart of what we do for students, at the whole heart what we do for teachers is about the benefit of having well-equipped, valued professionals. And that, I suppose, the chartered college conversations that people have had for a few years about treating teachers like professionals and giving them that level of kudos that they should have, rather than they're just, here we go, here's another one, we can get another one. That then allows the students to be really focused. And tied to it, absolutely, you know that it would come up today that we're having conversations about the numbers when it comes to teacher retention and recruitment and the stuff that goes with it. It's starting just in the UK, and I know that a lot of our listeners are outside of the UK, but we give some UK context. There is the conservative estimates are somewhere between 30 and 40,000 teachers in terms of a shortage, either leaving or retiring, and then obviously add to that and we're all very excited about a new government that might do something particularly in education, and obviously Bridget Phillipson's promise to recruit 6,500 more teachers, which is all brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant.
But like, what do we do? What do we do on this? On 3R, because it's tough, right? Because yes, keeping students at the centre, but it's not a finite game. We've talked about this many times. It's not a finite game of we get these people through the door and then it's done. That's not necessarily what the answer is, right? But where can we start, perhaps? Because I know that you've been having these conversations with some important people, right?
Well, I think just having the conversations with people, and I think that I would like to refer to the work of Vaughan Connolly, who took 8 years to do a PhD, that worked out that if you give teachers more time, it wouldn't have an impact on the learning of young people, and basically it would make everything better. He looked in detail using the TALIS data at the recruitment and retention. And it's obvious we need to look after our teachers and help them to look after themselves and the well-being. And people first, making pupils at the centre. But what I think we've also missed, and Evo brought this up, is that when we work with our teachers, and it's really important we empower our teachers to inspire the students. When we empower the teachers, we treat them unlike we teach the students. So we would be trying to differentiate our learning in the classroom. We put all our teachers in a room, and someone stands on the stage for an hour and says, look, guys, this is the way it's going to be. This is how it is. And it seems there's a real dichotomy there between, we understand what learning is. We understand personalising learning. We understand that teachers are also people, yet we don't perhaps work with that. And Evo took this one step further. He put all the different gens. So, you know, we've got Gen Z, we've got Gen Y, we've got all these range of people. And we're saying to them, this is the way that we're going to train you. And I think what clearly has to happen, we have to understand how teachers want to learn. We need to enable them with resources in a way that suits their mindset, but also perhaps even that part of the demographic, how they've been brought up and how they want to work. But making sure through all this that we make sure that the pupil is at the centre of what we're trying to do.
I agree. I wrote I was just thinking back to some of the things that I've tried, some of the things that haven't worked, some of the things that have been successful. When I say in terms of the collective stuff that I did whilst in further education, some of it's transferable, some of it isn't. And one of the things that I remember was in 2016, 2017. My line manager at the time, myself, the CEO, who's renowned in the FE space, and many different people got involved in terms of maths and English. And we looked at the model, and Ben must have heard his story a million times. Probably loads of people have. But I looked at the model, and we were saying, the stat by the AOC or the people who do the statistics, it's something like less than 20% of people are classed as a failure in maths and English at school will ever go on to achieve that magic grade, if that's what we're judging the benchmark of. And then what we do in our context, we were then saying, right, so you've probably done it quite a few times. You've probably failed it at school or been told you're a failure. We're going to do all this other stuff. And we looked at it and we said, okay, what are we currently doing? We had a recruitment crisis for maths teachers and quality maths teachers in terms of the way that would be delivered.
Yeah.
There was a disconnect between what was being delivered, how they saw it. The maths teachers, in fairness to them, were saying these are the maths students, but the people that were coming in going, I'm not a maths student, I'm a sports student, and I don't want to do maths, but the funding had changed and they had to do maths and English if they hadn't, and they're going through a cycle. So we all looked at it and we said, right, there are silly ideas. So of course there are. So if you say let's buy a robot and let's send people to the moon to learn maths, well, it's a bit of a silly idea. I get the whole thing of not silly ideas, but I said, right, let's come up with some tangible ideas of what we can achieve and how we might do it. So we were also paying crazy money to a reassessment for people who just finished GCSEs. We were then reassessing them. I'm not going to tell the full story because I've just realised I'm spending a lot of time with it. But we went through all that and I said, right, let's really start to think about a whole new structure. So we recruited 11 teaching assistant apprentices to bring them in. We knocked down some walls and we changed some spaces. Some were small enough to have 20 in, some were big enough to have 100 in. And we said, all of these people, there were 5,000 resits for maths every year in the college. And we were saying, what we're currently doing is they come in and then what we're going to try to achieve is that thing that you haven't done with 1 time or 5 times. In the next 34 weeks, we're going to deliver it in exactly the same way. And we're going to try and get you through something that they failed numerous times and over many, many years. So what we said is, right, we're going to do it really, really different. We're going to spend the first 2 weeks reassessing and evaluating in different ways to find out what their strengths are, what they're good at, but also where they can improve. We then broke down the model, and students that needed to attend a subject because they identified, and we supported them to identify that probably that was one of their weak areas in terms of the curriculum and what they needed to go through. Everybody else, if you were good at something, don't sit in a classroom. You can just demonstrate in different ways, either at home, in the independent learning zones. We created maths and English study coaches. We created teaching assistants in those spaces. We created loads of different stuff. You will still have some content delivered. We had an app to help all of the new teachers that we brought in. We brought in teaching apprentices that were passionate about helping young people. They didn't have the resource and understanding, so we built an app where they could take those resources, tailor it for every single week of their content. So it reduced their time in terms of planning. We spent a lot of money doing that. A wonderful person we've had on the podcast, Sammy J. White, developed a whole maths curriculum. Absolutely fantastic work. We did all of that. And we then said, right, what we're not going to do is we're going to remove functional skills. We're going to get everybody to do GCSE. That was a college decision. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on progress, not passing. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on the journey that you're on and see how we can do it. And we changed all of this model. We changed, and what students were saying to us, I love coming to the space. The challenge was getting them to go to class still because they wanted to be facilitated and take a bit of ownership of their learning because they didn't feel that a classroom. So that's a really long-winded way of. And then I wrote an article about it called "Knocking Down Wall," and I can't remember what it was. It's on Test. I think Test is now behind a paywall. I'll try and find the link, and if everybody has it, wants to have a read. I don't think I've got any hard copies, but I changed it. I say lots of people were involved. It wasn't my initiative, but we did that. We changed it, and our progress score for those students went through the roof. We were like taking young people, and because ultimately we were saying, if you were a 2 and you got a 3, absolutely fantastic, because ultimately that jump is so significant for those people who are so close to a 5 but just didn't get it. Why are we celebrating those people on the GCSE day? Let's celebrate everybody. Let's really focus on that, and let's focus on learning and progress. I just think, and ultimately what we did is we looked at the recruitment issue that we had. We looked at what we could recruit, how much money we had, and the different structures of what a teacher and a role a teacher played. So we brought those down and created different roles of different value, different salary. But it meant there was a real differentiate. We then brought in teacher apprentices that were passionate about education, probably really, really strong, just didn't have the qualification. We took them through that cycle. They were on a different salary. And then the teachers, those experienced, was great people to then lead some of those cluster groups and brought it back in-house. And the sports PE teachers the sports maths teachers wore sports gear. Everybody then was attributed to areas and everything else. We didn't get it right all the time, and the models evolved massively. But I think we looked at recruitment, we looked at retention, and we looked at the resource that we had in terms of financial and what we can do for those teachers. And we were saying, we want to give you a better chance, and the young people a better chance, not just at passing, about trying to get you passionate again about maths and English in different ways rather than just the traditional way. We focused on that and then built the structure around it.
But you're enabling them to learn how to learn, and you're passing and sharing and scaffolding the responsibility for learning with the student. That's the difference. Rather than it being from teacher to student model, you actually engage the student in understanding and being responsible for their own learning. And that's the thing we did. And it's that's such a good example, Steve, of how you can look at the problem and make it simpler. I was really lucky in 2016, I was able to do a sabbatical, and I got 3 months in the States to visit all the best schools. And I came up with a plan to justify the trip. And then I went to a conference in Boston where I met all the great and good. And so I met Chris Lehman from Sign Leadership Academy, and I met Tony Wagner and a bunch of people from High Tech High. And they all said, well, just come to our school and spend a few days at our school. So my plan changed slightly after that. And the example I want to use is there was a guy called Chris Lehman who had a real problem with learning in Philadelphia. Now, I don't know if you know a lot about Philadelphia, but it's not the best place to live, especially certain parts of Philadelphia. And he took on a council building in the heart of the worst part in Philadelphia, and set up a school there. And did it so that it was student-centered and putting people first in the strategy. And with a very limited budget, because the council didn't think it was going to work, he made that school thrive. And he showed passing responsibility to students, they thrived in that environment. And as a result, he was able then to spider that model so that he was then able to get satellite schools that worked with that in the same way that High Tech High did. And bringing that problem-based learning and all that in. And I think this idea of looking in a local sense at the limitations you've got with recruitment, retainment, and resourcing, and looking at how to find the best mechanism for that, unfortunately, comes down to great people often rather than great processes. And it's a real shame. Most of the wonderful schools that we know that are absolutely smashing it, and you go in and you can feel the culture, and you can feel that the kids and the staff are all on board. There's going to be someone who's driving that, I've read a lot about Catherine Place at Jubilee Park and Ty Golden down at Houghton Primary. And we all know those people. Chris Lehman was a fantastic example of someone who really made a difference. And that's what I noticed when I did my little tour of these schools in the States. It was about people. Question is, we could try and clone these people, or we could build these networks where they can support each other. And as a result, with that mentoring, this can work. And that's one of the things that I've found most interesting with this next phase that I'm in now, where I'm calling myself an educational enthusiast, because I work with people to support them on their journey, because I think that's what we should be doing. And helping people to understand the nature of the work when it's so complex to look after digital strategy in school. It's so complex, and it's quite easy to get rabbit in the headlights with the situation, rather than say, look, let's go back to our first principles. Are we putting the students first? Are we personalizing the learning for the educators? And are we measuring the right things? And I think that's what I'm finding is to identify people that we can grow in schools, to take on these responsibilities and do it with the right outcomes in mind.
I agree, and I think it's a multifaceted approach, and I think that's what you're advocating there, Ian, isn't it? It's about making the job sustainable. Yes, it's about ensuring that we value the people that are at the core of it. It's about ensuring that we don't necessarily say one size fits all, even when it comes to a teacher. I know we argue about one size fits all when it comes to a student. We certainly don't want that from a teaching perspective, and we won't mention these models that suggest that we should teach in a certain way and that teachers have got to be a certain kind of script and all the things. They're a different kettle of fish. Ultimately, what we're talking about here, and I think this is a conversation that genuinely, I think, hopefully is being conversations are being had at the DFE, conversations are being had at the assessment organisations and the multi-academy trusts and the networks of conversation. Because if we want to keep our teachers that are great, then we've got to pay them what they're worth. That is a big thing. And then we know that the news today recently, or relatively recently, I think it was yesterday, 29th. What day are we on today? Well, whenever, 29th of July, it says that there's a movement towards a 5.5% pay rise from September in the UK for teachers. Great. It's still not necessarily in comparison to where it should be, but there's a movement towards that. I know that's only the UK. But then there's that whole broader conversation around all education staff and about the value of TAs and the value of support staff and behavioural coaches and the social workers and the mental health first. So we've got to invest heavily into that space. So it is about finance, but it's also about value, because I think when we made the tail wag the dog, we've talked about assessment multiple times. When we made the tail wag the dog, that's when the teachers started to realise, or a lot of teachers started to realise, that this is not what we got into this for. And if all we're about is that stuff that Steve was fighting against with the maths curriculum previously, like if all we're about is moving to that number and then we're okay, as long as they get to that number then they're okay, then we've totally missed the boat. And so if we want to realistically not win the war for teachers, because I think, interestingly, we didn't call it a battle for teachers. We called it the war for teachers. And the nature of a war is that it has multiple battles. And we know there's a recruitment battle. We know there's a retention battle. We know there's a resourcing battle. And there's probably other things that don't begin with an I that are battles, right? There's obviously a training battle. There's a conversation about value and about professionalization and the stuff that goes with that. So as we get into it, I suppose what we're trying to say all along, Ian, is that we've got to move in the right direction. In the same way as we're not saying we get to a grade 4 for students and then we're done. We're not saying once we get to them 6,500 teachers, we're done. And it's not saying once we create this, they've revolutionised the teacher training program and the early career teacher program, which I absolutely welcomed, and I think it's really, really good. And speaking to a whole host of teacher training organisations recently and they're asking, how do we get this digital and AI conversation happening in our universities? And I'm like, yes. So ultimately, we're saying we need interest, and I'm just going to throw this out there because or else I'll ramble forever. We say we're losing 40,000 teachers. Let's just say that's in the UK. Let's just say around the world we need 1 million new teachers around the world. That in the old model we know that that's the case, right? In the old model that we need, if it's 1 to 30, we're going to need 100,000 or 1 million new teachers. But are we moving into a world where the role of the teacher is shifting and therefore we might not need as many? I don't know. I'm just being provocative, throwing the thing. I'm not saying we do or we don't. I just want to ask that question.
Yeah. So the thing we did in 2018 was called Developing Digital. And the reason we used the verb is because you will never get there with digital. I don't think you'll ever get there with teaching either, because I think it's an ongoing process and they're movable. I think it all comes down to efficacy and teachers feeling they're a part of the solution and feeling that the solution they're working to with the school and with the students is within their control and they've got some ownership and power. But fundamentally, it goes right back to treasuring what we measure. So if we're in schools, we're measuring exam results. That's what teachers are going to focus. And so we've got to look at that. And there's some really interesting work that, and I've mentioned Kai Vasher before. So Kai's doing some work with a guy called Michael Savage on looking at the sort of data we collect. And we all know we collect in all this progress data, but also he's talking about collecting slow data and kind data and looking at the sort of understanding of the emotional intelligence of where the students are. And therefore we can look at the relationship between their academic intelligence and their emotional intelligence. And if that's the case, then where do we need to focus our energy in schools to be able to enable young people to be able to learn how to learn and to take responsibility for the learning? Because then so many other of these issues that are front and center will start to blend in, and then we can look at holistic cultural change for school, which is where we're trying to get to, isn't it? I think is that where the promised land is, with embedding a culture of change where people are comfortable and they can approach change in a way that makes change stick.
Yeah, and I think, and again, going back to a recent podcast, the black box thinking approach of how can we be open about, and when we implement a culture that wants to change, how can we support that and allow those risks and those opportunities and those new ideas to come to the forefront without those teachers making the news, or as a worst case scenario, or even or just being ambassador or by being criticised for trying to do something different. Because we need to say, right, we want to look at this change. We want to see a different approach and for the benefit of our young people and the core-centric bit of young people. But if you do it and you get it wrong, then this is what's going to happen to you. You do that and nothing changes, because there isn't that psychological safety, there isn't that culture of innovation and that opportunity, and staff see it as, I'm not going to put my head above parapet and change, because if I do keep it in this safe way, I'm just going to get those people just go, I'm just going to get my head down. I'll never get in trouble and I'll never be seen. We don't want that. We want people to be seen and supported.
It's so true. And what happens in those innovations, it's what we're measuring. You know, if we're and the criteria we're using to define success, you know, if we're looking at motivation and enthusiasm of the young people in the projects that we're doing, or if we're just looking at outcomes as far as its progress and exam results. And I think we need to look holistically at this, because fundamentally, I think education comes back to engendering curiosity and an ability to be creative and take autonomy, take ownership over our solutions, because we're trying to help these young people take their place in the world. And it's a technological world and going to be. So digital has got to be a part of that, but it's the fundamentals. And if we allow young people to be involved in this and measure the right things, then I think we can make sure that these projects you're talking about, Steve, can have legs and will make change stick.
Yeah, I agree. I think you talked wonderfully at the event. You brought some wonderful people together. These connectivities, these collaborations, these breaking down silos of whether that's within organisations of maths teachers sticking with maths teachers and English teachers sticking with English teachers and the PE teachers all huddling at the back. We don't want to be those people that go, well, you know what, let's get around the room and let's dance and let's sit with people that you're uncomfortable talking to. I think there is it's already happening. I think it works really, really well. I think we just need to make sure that we work with those groups, share, collaborate, and that connectivity of like-minded people continues to happen. Doesn't start, because it's already happening. It's been happening for a long time. Continues to happen, and is brought to the forefront and is celebrated more, in my opinion.
You know, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things, and the reason I wanted James Cully to do the piece he did, I mean, he couldn't join us on the night because he hasn't been well at the moment, and so I think it would have been too much for him. But he works at a UTC, which is all about partnerships. And so the projects that the students are looking at there might be a partnership with Disney. And so therefore they're creating 3D models for Disney, and then Disney will look at those. And I think changing the audience has an important thing. And this idea of partnerships needs to exist in schools, because one of the things you're talking about, Ben, is the financial model for schools. And clearly it isn't working, and we're not able to invest as much as countries like Singapore and perhaps Albania and Poland, and all for perhaps slightly different reasons. Countries are investing in education in different amounts. And one of the things I've been exploring and working with Intel to explore is this idea of public-private partnerships. So, and the work I'm looking at in Wales is where Intel is saying, we'll give you these resources and we'll support your teachers, and we'll support the implementation, and we'll support the training, and we'll do all that for free. And then they're looking at what part the Welsh Government will play in that relationship to be able to say, we will give this amount of time to young people. We will set these metrics and these measurements to be able to then allow us to monitor the success. And we'll look at an implementation plan that's realistic for the staff and for the staff well-being. And I think you can see lots of companies are exploring that. And Canva is another good example that are offering their education resources free and actually training staff either online or in the school, and getting raising the level so that staff are able to provide a return on their investment of their time. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to explore this public-private partnership, because education doesn't have the money. And these companies, as long as they're managed and regulated and the guardrails are in place, these companies are prepared or are able to offer their resource and support that resource, so we can upskill our staff, so that we can provide an education platform that is fit for purpose now and for the future.
Yeah, and that's it, right? So it's that whole conversation of how do we bring all the stakeholders into a room and try and that have to be a physical room, right? How do we get the stakeholders into a conversation to say, how do we do this? Although we could have an Edufuturist roundtable conversation about how we bring people together and get the right people in the room. But ultimately,
I think we should.
Yeah, I agree. And bringing those people who have got a vested interest, and we know that everybody's got a vested. If you're a business, you've got a vested interest in ensuring that the young people, and that's fine. And we've got to be kept, like you said, the safeguards and the guardrails have got to be in place. That it's not just about we want to create this group of homogenous type of people that do this role. We've got to develop that flexibility and that storytelling and the creativity stuff that sits in a human space, especially. And we haven't even talked about those two letters that often come up on the podcast nowadays of how AI is disrupting everything that we do, right? So what do we do in that space? And I'm conscious of how we don't just want to be these people. None of us on the podcast today want to be in that position where we are just talking about it. Yeah. And talking about it is great, but it's got to turn into action. And we're prepared, like as are you, I know, to put the time, the effort, the money to go in and go, how do we make this a reality? Is it a private school that says, you know what, we're going to rethink this conversation? We talked like with Will Goldsmith at B-Dales that are changing the way that they do assessment. Yeah, we had conversations with some of the state schools that are like Matt Jessup and others that are going, do you know what? We care about the natural world. We care about students doing outdoor work as much as things with their hands, as much as the academic stuff. It's not saying one is better than the other. Yeah. It's saying that we need that holistic development. We've talked with Shauna Pilgrim, who talked about that whole education more broadly. And that, for me, when we look at that trends booklet and we talk about holistic education, lifelong learning, culture stuff, and we talk about enabling technology, if those four things come together, what we can do is we can say to teachers, we value you more than your year of service. We value you more than your grade. that you get for a student, we value you more than how we can replace you with a technology, then something starts to shift, and we put our money where our mouth is. Whether it's in salaries, whether it is in resourcing, it's building schools. And by building schools, it doesn't necessarily mean physical buildings. It's all the stuff that goes with it. There's a lot on the table, right?
I think it comes back to building efficacy, and I think teachers and people in schools need to feel that efficacy, and I think they felt that assessment has always been the thing that they couldn't overcome. And with these public-private partnerships, I mean, it's okay to realize that business has different goals from education. But I think we can line up those goals so that we can make sure that in the schools we achieve that holistic education. We empower, the teachers so that they can inspire the kids. We do the things we need to do, and that the businesses can exist. They can make a profit so they can reinvest, but that they can also support the digital development of the whole learning community and make this learning platform that needs to exist. I think I don't know whether both of you agree with me that to have a learning community, you need to have something that creates a glue to be able to allow people to communicate and to share resources. And Wales is a wonderful example, and that's why I'm doing the work there, because they already have this wonderful digital platform that isn't delivering the full return on investment at the moment. And it would be really useful to find a few ways of driving that so that they can get more value from that. And so
absolutely. And Wales have started that with Hub, haven't they? And Scotland have tried it with Glow. There's other organisations. England, we've said this a million times. England is a million years behind when it comes. It's not. We can't talk about the UK education system because the Welsh and the Scottish have gone a lot further on. Even and the Northern Irish have gone a lot further on. It's not necessarily perfect, but they've further down the journey, right?
And it's work in progress. And it's interesting. The people who manage Hub, a company called Thinky, or quite an innovative learning company, they also manage the digital platform for Egypt. Now, in Egypt, there's 20 million students.
Right.
And so, and I've been working with GEMS in, so that's a group of for-profit schools. And that group, an enormous number of schools, they have their learning platform they've developed because there's so many schools it's worth investing in, and North Anglia are doing the same. So everyone's doing this, and a lot of the maths have done it. But what we don't want is lots of different shaped wheels, do we? And to be honest, if there was one platform that would work so that when teachers went from one to another, and then students, whether, parents have got people in kids in different schools, it wouldn't matter because they'd understand how some of the best models for resourcing. And I think we need to, often we get around this, like in school, you'd put your arm around your work so people couldn't see what you're doing, right? There's a lot of that going on, whereas really, we're comparators, not competitors. And we've got our niches, and whether you're a MAT or an academy or a big group of schools, we could share a lot more and allow the development. And yes, we haven't mentioned those two letters. And I don't think we need to, because once you've created a learning platform, once you have data and privacy and sorted, and once you can start understanding how people are learning and how people are supporting learning, and then you can build those lovely dashboards that tell you where you are, and then you can build the insights because you understand the people you're working with, you understand what you're trying to achieve, and you set the right success criteria rather than just attendance and academic progress. Although if you don't have attendance, you're not going to get academic progress, are you? So I think it seems really simple, and the further away I get from working 18 hours a day in a school and having a little bit more space and traveling and visiting schools, it is obvious we just need a platform And we just need to involve everyone in these important conversations that we're talking about so that we can slowly, and whether they're battles or we frame them as important conversations in developing understanding, that's an interesting question, because perhaps battle builds that oppositional argument rather than debate. But if we can frame things in the right way and build these conversations, then it's just about, we have an international community that is passionate about empowering young people and giving them the skills to make the world a better place. And, even if I want to just be selfish, I don't want to be somebody in my retirement who's living in a poor society. I'd much prefer to be a poor person in a rich society where everyone is benefiting. And I think this whole idea of how we do that, and I did a talk at my old school, Habs. They had a TEDx thing, and so I did a school. And I just said to them, you are the people that will build this society. You are the people that will create this digital economy in the UK and make this a place that everyone wants to live. We can then work on how we make schools places people want to go to rather than don't want to go to.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way, a wonderful thought, and I think we probably need to have further conversations on this level, and I know that's the reason why we are pleased to partner and work with people like you, Ian, and those people who are pushing that envelope. We always wrap our podcast up with 3 quick-fire questions, and this season's. So I'm going to start the first one, and Steve will do one, then I'll do one. So the first question is this. First of the quick-fire questions is, if you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
You said quick, so I'm going to have to top my head. I just feel that we need to be student-centered. I think we need to make sure that everything has measurements about not student satisfaction and not student happiness, but student progress, but holistically.
What is the most exciting educational trend you see emerging?
Like, I've been doing this for a while. I've been doing this since the 80s. Okay. And I always saw myself, I will get to the quick bit, but I always saw myself as the person who was interested in the exciting. So whenever there was some new fad or trend, I jumped in it to explore it and see whether it would work in the school. I think finally there's a huge movement that realizes the importance of empowering teachers and putting teachers right at the center of this and trying to understand how to support them. And, I've got a phrase that I'm when I go into schools, I'm asking people, how can we help you to be the best, whether it's teacher or head teacher, that you could ever be? And I think there's an understanding that is right at the center now. So it is a trend, and there is a movement, I think, to really make sure the teacher understands how they could be the best they can be.
Love it. And the last question is, who is your biggest inspiration in education?
Obviously, you two guys. Obviously. But apart from you two, I don't think there's one person, and I could list. I mean, all the people I invited and people I talked to are all huge inspirations. But I do feel there's a movement. And what I end up doing when I'm doing my round tables, I bring up people and having a chat, and I say, will you be in my gang? Although it's not my gang, but I do feel there's a movement and a gang of people who now are inspiring each other and feeding off each other, and I've mentioned a lot of those people, and obviously you two, and and Dan Fitzpatrick. But there's people like Dan Sivak, who works at Thinky, and Darren Wallace who are working there, people who are investing in the technology. And that one of the things I feel I'm doing, because I feel I'm at the end of my career. You know, it's I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet, but I feel I'm at that point. But I feel there's lots of people, and I mentioned Dan, and I mentioned to you earlier, Ben, that one of my ex-students who's had quite an illustrious career, he's about 32 at the moment, and he's now decided to actually do a master's in education and work out how he can apply all his understanding about AI and technology and how he can do it to make the world a better place. And so Saravanan, who I mentioned to you earlier, Ben, he's now wanting to take his place in this movement. And that's what's exciting about this. And when he showed me his reading list of all the people who's been reading, I just thought, well, this is it. There's so much great stuff going on. And if we can share this and collaborate and build a movement, then I think that movement would be what would inspire and we could all feed from.
So I love it. Many people have a look on
not
LinkedIn.
really quick fire. Sorry, guys.
That's fine. No, but over over the lifetime of since the 80s, so those lots of inspirations will come up, and that's absolutely fine. So don't worry about it. We've had very quick fire, and we've had some people that have explored it, and that's absolutely fine as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on again. I think a massive thanks to you for the build up, for the work that you did around that panel, that discussion that we had, the recordings beforehand, obviously sharing that and bringing it together, the championing that you do and the support that you give to us is really appreciated. Things go on behind the scenes, and we said it on the night, but we really value your commitment to the partnership and working together with you. We love it because it opens doors and partnerships and opportunities to work with different people and more people that we haven't met, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring different people to the events and build that community, not just because it's an Edufuturist thing, because ultimately we might have something that they can share and learn from, and vice versa. And if we all learn, then ultimately that's what we're trying to inspire in everybody, a passion for learning. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to discuss the war for teachers, the 3 Rs. And we're really excited to see the next steps of where we take this, what country, and how we will, us three and many other people, work together to share and collaborate and break down the silos and bring people together, the like-minded wackos of the world. We'll change education step by step, I think. So thanks, Ian.
And thanks, Steve. And one of the things I was trying to do was like a flipped learning classroom. I was trying to seed the conversations before the event. And I think similarly, I would like, if anyone's got some stories that help other people to understand the value of the work they're doing to deal with the challenges of the 3 Rs, then please do share them and share them with us so that we can all learn from this. Because I think, as I've tried to say, I think there's a movement here. I think we're all part of that movement, and we can all feed off each other and also learn and grow from each other. So if anyone's got any stories, I'd love to hear them.
Absolutely. And we'll put your contact details in the show notes for this episode. We'd love to continue these conversations. Thanks, Ian, for joining us on the Edufuturist podcast. And don't forget, everybody, if you haven't done so already, you can join Ian and us at Edufuturist Uprising 2025 look at that, it's ages off. Go and grab your tickets. The link is in the show notes too. We'll see you very, very soon. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.